is located in the board meeting room on the north wall. The purpose of this meeting is to receive an update on the following items: the executive director position, the district's academic eligibility plan, current district data relating to truancy attendance, and technology audit. So, would you please do the roll call, Mr. Ray?
Fay. Godding.
Here.
America. Scanlon.
Present.
Snow. Underwood.
Here.
Vargas.
Here.
Wayne. Williams.
Present.
6 present.
Okay. So the first item that we have is an update on the executive director positions, and they're going to provide us with some information.
President Godding, Mr. Evans, members of the board, we are honored to come before you this evening and give you an update of our first year, completing our first year as executive directors, and some plans for our upcoming year as executive directors. We can honestly say that we've certainly grown and evolved from what we were a year ago. We were kind of finding our way in a lot of different areas, how our schools would accept us, how we would fit in executive council, what exactly were our roles in the grand scheme of things. So it's been a great learning year for us. We're going to open our presentation. We have a short PowerPoint for you, but we're going to open our presentation tonight with a video montage. David Orrick from Cross and Joftis really put it together for us, but he edited it specially for this presentation, so you could kind of see what we've been doing this past year, and then we'll have our presentation for you.
Great, thank you.
Most of it showed us working together as a team and getting trained, which was extremely valuable. I shared that with Mr. Evans. I don't think we could be as effective as we are today without the training of help of Steve Gehring and Cross and Joftis, because and the way we gelled together as a team and working together as a unit instead of 4 separate individuals. So with that, I'm going to turn over our PowerPoint and our first couple slides to my colleague Lisa Utterback.
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to say that when we talk about things evolving, it was 365 days ago from today. I remember driving to the new meeting that started off the school year, and I remember getting there 2 hours early because I was so nervous, not really having a full understanding as to what my new role was going to be, how things were going to work out, and here we are today. And we worked together throughout the year, day in and day out, supporting each other, pushing each other, and making sure that our work aligned with what our schools need. We know all the research points to one of the most important critical attributes of a successful school is a principal that can lead, but not just instructionally, but lead and create a culture that empowers every stakeholder to want to believe in the work that we're doing. And so thank you immensely for your support. It was you that worked along with our superintendent to create these positions, and I'm proud to say we're just beginning. As we look back at our goals over the last year, we worked together and came up with 3 critical goals. One of them was to really work in collaboration with the other district departments, not take place of the work that they were doing, but to ensure that professional development was strategically aligned in the areas of leadership development that were relevant and timely. Our principals, you could see from a question earlier, is, am I not going to have the ability to reach out and work directly with operations? Absolutely not. But we know firsthand from being in those schools day in and day out what the needs are, and to help advocate and be the voice of our principals. And Mr. Evans mentioned several times already that we're working towards a model to set up professional learning communities and really going to be the drivers of principal professional development. Number 2 goal that we had was to work together as a team in collaboration with principals, staff, and the community to build relational trust. And that is something that took a lot of time. You can't come in and say, oh, I'm going to support you, everything's going to be great, share all of your issues. It was being in the buildings, being visible, and meaning what we say and saying what we mean, and walking alongside the principals and advocating that really built that relational trust. And also building that trust amongst each other as a team to ensure that what I say or what I do is a positive reflection on my 3 colleagues and vice versa. And then understanding and be an advocate for the community. Our 3rd goal this year was to work and develop structured protocols and themes for coaching and building site visits. And what we mean by that is we know that there's parking lot talk. Principals would leave a meeting, and I was a principal at one time, and have conversations, or are you doing this, or are you doing that? We wanted to make sure that our work was aligned, and most importantly, that it was consistent. And so a message that I would give if I would walk out, that principal is going to call someone else to ensure that our work really supports the mission of our roles, and we're conforming and creating a framework of success. When you look at what our work is overall, one thing that we are very, very focused on is ensuring that we've spent 50% of our time working in schools. And I have to tell you, under the leadership of Mr. Evans, we were participants in the 3L workshop and conference recently, and there were some of you there. And one thing that I could say that I took away, and I want to make sure I say this in a positive way, but most of the districts around the country that have principal supervisors, it's more of a compliance where you're just ensuring that mandates are done, and our district is one where we are really aligning support, and they were very impressed with what we were already doing in year 1 in the work of the board to ensure that we have the support to do that. And so we made certain that 50, if not more, 50% of our time is spent in buildings, and all of those districts around the country, with the exception, I think, of Houston and Florida, could not believe that we actually were in buildings working with principals and coaching them, not just supervising them from a paperwork perspective. And when we're in buildings, we're observing, coaching, feedback and next steps. We're guiding them along and building their capacity. And in addition to that, we've also taken principals that are very successful and doing the work and sharing models that they're doing with other principals, and principals are leading principals, and that was very visible in our summer institute as well. And then supporting and advocating for our principals, making sure that they have what they need and that they're getting the support that they need. And we know that you can't, there's only a limited amount of dollars, but knowing that we can sit alongside them and brainstorm, okay, you have to have a combination classroom, but let me help you and decide where best is that going to fit within your building. And then obviously the annual evaluation process of principals, we've heard it for quite some time. I was a principal that when my evaluation team came out, I think 3 times each year, my first 3 years. And I'm pretty certain that if you ask the 4 executive directors that we could give you a pretty good movie of what's happening in the schools where we so proudly serve. And then collaborative leadership with district departments, making sure that we support the mission of the district, not taking place of the work of other departments, but making certain that they have the support that they need to support schools. And if there's an issue, following up to make sure is there something that we can do to help. It works both ways. I've received calls from some departments that say, your principal might need some assistance with this. Can you help us? Or vice versa. And then the district STAT process. This was the first year out of the strategic plan that we put that STAT process in place, where we brought schools together and talked about school-wide discipline, academic achievement, and shared all of that work with them, and then looked at their results and had an opportunity to collaborate and share best practices. And you had data to show that. And so it was a model where principals were, again, looking at data and learning from one another. And then our work also was to design and implement a new principals workshop. Last year, we came in, and I believe it was in July, and we kind of pretty much replicated the new principal workshop induction from years past, but this year we had an opportunity, based upon our work last year and the feedback from new principals, what can we do differently? Your voice is important. And we surveyed them, and they told us what we could do differently to ensure that the new group, and what a great year to do that with, I think 13 new principals coming in. So we had a phenomenal new Principals Institute that really afforded those principals to come together and learn from district departments and walk away with tools that they could actually take back. And we actually brought in their mentors this time, and they actually had a working lunch with their mentors to kick off their year. And then also, this was something that we were very proud of with our work with CIA, was the Summer Principals Institute, working in collaboration and putting together a workshop, and the feedback. Again, we reached out to principals and had principals share their best practices with one another and actually run sessions, and it really empowered others to say, hey, I know I can do that too. I have great things to share. And then the Principal Mentor Program. We want to ensure that, according to not just a strategic action plan, but there's a highly effective principal in every school. And we know that with new principals, you need support. You need support from day one. You need somebody that you can call that's not necessarily your supervisor, but can just check up on you, and you can roll up your sleeves and let your guard down and really work through those issues and get into their buildings. And so we're really excited about the Principal Mentor Program, and we did that last year as well, and we're year 2. And then plan and provide for differentiated professional development based on the principal needs. And we're really excited about year 2 with moving forward with the professional learning communities and really being able to provide principals with specific professional development because we work directly with them. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Mrs. Comine, but thank you immensely for your support, and we're expecting great things this year.
We know that student outcomes are our number one goal, and we also know in order for our student outcomes to be a reality, we have to have a highly effective principal in every school and a highly effective teacher in every classroom. And we do that by coaching and developing our principals so that they could coach and develop teachers in classrooms. With that said, we critically believe that our development is equally important, because if we do not continue to develop ourselves and enhance our skills, then we cannot in turn enhance our principal skills and so forth. So as you can see, we do continue to have in-depth training with Cross and Joftis. The training that we had last year continues this year. The frequency is a little bit less, but the quality is a little bit more in-depth. And one of the things I would like to highlight is the Leaders Leading Leaders Conference that we most recently participated in, called the 3 Ls. And that was created and implemented by Mr. Evans and with the help of Cross and Joftis. And that gave us an opportunity to expand our development outside of this district. We were able to work with different principal supervisors throughout the Midwest. And through that collaboration and sharing ideas, we were able to create some professional learning communities. And those professional learning communities have given us a few more contacts where we can reach out to those other districts to see what best practices they are using and how that affects their student outcomes. So we continue to appreciate the development we receive from the district, also from Cross and Joftis, but now reaching out through across the Midwest. We also firmly believe that as we develop, that our district academic action plan is of utmost importance, and we consistently keep that in the forefront. We actually call it our district theory of action, because we do believe that if our schools implement the district's academic action plan, our schools will improve. And so Dr. Chisholm is going to talk about how our academic action plan impacts our work as executive directors.
One of the things that we engaged in this summer with Steve Gehring, with his assistants, was looking at our ED, theory of action. So meaning going into next year as we're evolving, what are some things that we're really going to focus in on in order to continue to support the district academic action plan? So what you see up here are just some statements that we came up with together as an ED group. And basically there are statements: if we increase our school leaders' ability to effectively improve their schools by providing that effective and timely feedback and coaching to principals on site one-to-one. And one of the things that we're noticing in our job is that obviously that face-to-face contact is important, but also giving them that timely feedback because the principals want that feedback. So really making sure that we're continuing to get that 50% of our time in buildings and providing that critical feedback for principals. And then also bringing principals together to network, learn, share best practices, talking about those PLCs. So a lot of principals have been hearing that term a lot this summer. During one of our principal institutes this summer, we actually focused on Todd Whitaker's work of School Culture Rewired. And we talked about that importance of creating a new culture. And even as a district, how are we going to continue to do that as a district and help them evolve through allowing principals to share what they're doing, best practices together in a professional learning community. So one of the things that we're going to be working on as EDs is providing principals opportunities to learn from each other and also help drive some of the discussions that we have here as a district with them. Lastly, we have, if we differentiate resources, ED support, funding, positions, etc. And this part in particular is talking about some of our schools that are lower performing. How are we going to continue to provide support to those building principals and to those students? How are we going to differentiate? And even today, this morning during our kickoff, we had a conversation about equity and talking about everything isn't always equal, but how are we providing opportunities to allow people to level the playing field? So when we're looking at some of our buildings that are having more challenging needs, are we actually providing the right type of support that they need in order to help them move student academic achievement forward and change the culture of their building? And then the last one says, provide principal voice to help shape system-level leadership and policies. One of the critical parts of our role is to make sure that we don't forget where we came from, which means when we're sitting there at the table with exec council and we're having the conversations down here at the executive office, we always remember that we're the voice of the principals. And we want to make sure that their voice is always heard at this level, so it helps shape what we do and to make sure that we're meeting their needs each and every day. And lastly, if we do that, our schools will continue to reach every student every day, preparing them for success. Thank you very much.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for the EDs on the work they have done or the work that they're moving forward with? Mrs. Fay?
So I thought that was a really good presentation. Thank you. But when you were talking about just now, it made me think about, you were talking about differentiate resources, funding positions, et cetera. Do you feel like in your positions you have the ability to, you have the authority to make those kind of recommendations and work within the current structure as far as budget, human resources, curriculum needs, all of those kinds of things to make those decisions?
I believe we work extremely closely and in tandem with the Executive Council to make those things happen.
So it's happening the way it should happen?
I believe it is, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Tony, or Ms. Vargas? I don't think so.
Excuse me. Thank you guys for the presentation. It's particularly helpful. I mean, I saw the 3L. I was there on day one of the 3L conference, and it was inspiring to see so many leaders there and seeing you take part in that professional development as well as be examples. So thank you for that. And it was very helpful seeing all the qualitative evidence that shows the work that you've been doing. It's clear that we've been, starting something from scratch and trying to make it work. I do have questions. I was trying to take back a look at our strategic plan, and then also thinking about for our workshops to make sure there's data-driven as possible. I know we have data, and I'm assuming there's more data that isn't here. So just a couple questions around: do we have data for let's say number 2.6 priority, the percent of classrooms or schools that implement best practices? We said we'd measure that using reflection surveys, or the percent of principals rated as distinguished or exemplary as the baseline to see the impact to your work. School climate data from the schools, principal workshop surveys, summer principal institute surveys. It would be extremely helpful for us as a best practice, because I'm not seeing it here, that we have that data for the workshop so that we're informing the public around the effectiveness of this, especially since this is like sort of a low stakes, you're starting it from scratch. That they're planning for next year is grounded in your survey results from these different key aspects of your role. And then in addition, we're getting as much as possible aligned to the different priorities and the measurements that we said we're going to use for each of the big priorities in our strategic plan. So do you have some of that data? I know you shared some of it as ongoing throughout the year, but do we have something that summates some of that data that we can attach to this publicly, and also maybe we can reflect on?
We talked about that as we were putting the PowerPoint together. The data that we have is the district data that I believe CIA will be presenting to you in a formal form at some point soon.
Okay.
And that's data that's qualitative data that we use to inform our work, as well as the feedback we get at every meeting that we have with our principals. We do keep all that feedback, and that's what informs our work as we move forward. But yes, we do have it, and you will have it too.
Okay, that's great. I just I want to make sure that, especially since we have this kickoff to this week, and you had the summer principal, that data is informing your practice. It sounds like it is. I know you're doing that work with Steve Gehring, but that we can communicate that transparently to the community, the impact of your role.
Right, and I think this morning the principals just found out who were the great award winners, and we had, I believe we had quite a bit more award winners than we had last year.
That's great.
Yeah.
And some in particular, this percent of principals report, I'm thinking about the customer service in 4.3, ensure that central office provides school and stakeholders that stand in customer service. The percentage, one of the goals was the percent of principals reporting that they receive outstanding support from TAC overall and by the department, division, yada, yada, and that we'd have a principal survey for that. Not the nitty-gritty detailed ones, but we have at least 2 to 3 measurements for each of these objectives. Those are the ones that I think matter the most, that I will want to attach to this, and for us to then be able to look at. That would be fantastic.
And I was just going to throw out there, too, there's a lot of different data that we're also looking at through climate surveys that have been provided to us through research that we're also using to help guide our individual conversations that we have with principals, but also knowing what buildings need in regards to culture and climate. So there's a lot of data that we also receive in collaboration with research and things like that that we've also used just with our evaluation process and also with our work with principals.
No, I just want to make sure it's packaged. Yeah.
Right.
In addition to that, Every time we work with our principals, like at the new Principals Institute, we took their feedback and made sure that this year the new Principals Institute was more conducive to their needs. But an example of the Summer Principals Institute, they received an evaluation. Those results were compiled, and Mr. Evans shared on the start of day 2 what the evaluation was. But we as a team looked at the evaluation and said, what can we tweak a little bit differently so day 2's more interactive? And so we do have all of that data.
Yeah, that's
And
helpful.
we are honestly right now, due to the assessment results coming in, we will now start our final process for our principal evaluation. So those are not complete at this time, but they are easily accessible through human resources as well.
And are these done, I remember last time some of these were done in person. I would want to make sure that we're getting as much unbiased data that is maybe through an online system. This way we have something more comprehensive aligned to these specific measures from the strategic plan. Do we have that, or are most of these surveys done in person and monitored by our staff?
The climate survey.
Okay.
The climate surveys are done online, and that information goes back to research, and they
Okay.
compile that information.
Okay. But the surveys around your support, let's say that one, the percent of principals reporting they receive outstanding support, is that also through the climate survey, or is that separate? That's not.
We've done a paper pencil evaluation
Okay.
at the end of each, and what we've
Okay.
done is divided, say we've had the Summer Principal Institute, day 1, day 2, we divided the evaluation up into each component. So for example, when Lisa presented for the first component, they had an opportunity to fill out an evaluation on Lisa. Then when I was second, they did an evaluation on me. So they were able to complete a paper pencil evaluation. It had quantitative and qualitative results, and we're able to give evaluations on each of our sessions, but also collectively as a whole.
Can we ask research to create an online survey for our future so that there's consistency from survey to survey and the data can be more immediately housed someplace? I'm imagining somebody's entering this manually into something and keeping track of it. But
So it
yeah.
sounds like you'd like two things, something
Yeah.
done online and also directly tied to the strategic plan of strategies.
Yes, exactly.
Okay?
That's-
And if you want to send us specific strategic plan strategies, we would happily accept them.
Yeah, go ahead. You can.
So I feel like there's a slight disconnect. I don't know if you feel that, but you're
Yes.
listing some specific measures
Yeah.
that are in the strategic plan that you believe are tied directly to the work of the EDs. And I think that that's what he's asking for, that we'd like to see
Yeah,
as far as data points. And maybe in order to have that data be most useful, it needs to be done in a consistent way every time, so that every time you have a principal institute or whatever they're called, or every time, or when you come back to us next year, you did it this way this year, and so we can compare this year to next year to year after. And then there was another one that was related to the number of principals receiving in
Yeah, number of principals receiving a distinguished or exemplary on their evaluations.
So that's a data point that is in the strategic plan as well.
Yeah.
That could be tied, not exclusively to the work you're doing, but
I think, so some of that we're working through right now, but and I'll give you an example of when you were talking about the Summer Institute, and the reason why we did it paper, pencil, in person is because we wanted to use that immediate feedback to influence the next day whether we made any adjustments and changes. So I think it kind of varies how we do, because like the specific purpose for that feedback was we wanted to make sure we hit the mark on day 1, and if not, we wanted to make adjustments to day 2. So online for that might not be as conducive, but like when we got feedback early in the year on EDs, we actually had a principal, when it was paper pencil, a principal actually conducted the survey while we were not in the room. So a principal collected that information and then didn't even give it back to us, actually gave it to David Oric, and who took it down to research, and then they took that information and then compiled it for us. So we are cognizant that we want to make sure we're getting that authentic feedback, but I do think it varies sometimes depending upon what we're after, how we ask for that feedback and information.
And I hear that, and I think that's great, and I think we're talking about two totally different things. You're talking about feedback that you need to use to do your job, and we're talking about feedback that we need to use and communicate to the public so that they know you're doing your job and that's working. You see the difference?
Yeah, and I think of the same way of teaching, right? Like there's better analogy. We're teaching to actually guide and adjust instruction, and teaching actually to evaluate where a student is, make bigger long-term decisions. It's great that we're having information to pivot, but if we don't have information across everything that you do, and there's some consistent lines, and I'm using these benchmarks, probably about 6 or 7 benchmarks on our strategic plan, then we can evaluate the effectiveness of the program in a more holistic, unbiased way. And I want to do that because I know there's amazing work that we're doing, and the better that we can quantify it, the better we can learn which aspects are we actually hitting out of the park and which are we not, so that the next year when we're doing our strategic planning process with your role, we're changing your role based off of a mixture of qualitative but quantitative data that's aligned to what we said we're trying to measure. And I think that's the piece I would want to be looking at right now for our workshop, as more so, and communicating to the public. That's just me, but I also am reflecting back on our data-driven, being data-driven as a school board, that's what we're doing when we're trying to make changes and or also applaud the celebrations that we're doing as a district.
Okay, so I know you mentioned 6 or 7, Tony, so if you can just get those to.
They're on the strategic plan, so they're.
We just want to make sure that.
No.
Are they the ones at the bottom of the?
No, they're in the strategic plan. So, for example, 4.3, ensure that central office provides schools and stakeholders with outstanding customer service. There's 3 measures that we said we're going to do. This is the one that's on OPS website. The first one, I think there's ones that completely align. Like this first one, increase the number of percent of principals reporting. There's others. I flagged about 7 of them that I believe align.
So if you've got them flagged, why don't you get those to Mr. Ray so that we make sure that we're covering the information that you looked at, and just in the essence of time so that we can.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Ms. Fay was trying to call out, because I was not being articulate, that we're measuring those across all of the activities that you are doing over the year. This way we are measuring the things that are right, not over measuring just for the sake of it, but the things that matter the most, which is our strategic plan, not something that we think is right or wrong.
Right. Yep.
I will do that.
So if you could do that, that'd be great. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, Ms. Williams has a question.
I just want to thank you for starting your presentation off with something very eye-catchy. It's been a long day, so I really appreciated that. And I do appreciate as well the work that you all are doing. I've seen a few of you in action at the schools, and it truly is making a difference. So I just encourage you to keep the passion, and it shows. I was like, maybe I should switch jobs and become a principal so that I can come to this institute and come and be a part of this. I mean, you guys bring a great passion, and I know we're talking about your plans, but I think where you started and where you are, it's really showing your growth, and so I look forward to an amazing year 2 and 3, and so thank you. I just want you to know how much you are all appreciated for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Chisholm, get off to your anniversary dinner. And oh,
I didn't know if it was appropriate
okay.
to give a shout out to my wife, but I will say happy anniversary, darling.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you all very much. It's fun to watch the work you're doing and the interaction you have with principals. Okay. Mr. Ray, are you, whoops. The district's academic eligibility plan. Update on that. Dr. Kerberg.
Thank you, Mrs. Godding. I'd like to welcome and invite Mr. Steve Eubanks to come forward. He's our new supervisor of physical education. Athletics is his focus, and he used to be the principal at King Science. Joining him today will be Mr. Luke Dillon, assistant principal, athletic director, Central High School. And then from our research division, Mr. Chris Fitch will also be a part of the presentation giving you data. We're going to be covering 4 areas, And we'll be providing data on participation of our athletes, academic performance of our athletes, eligibility, and academic coaching. And then we'd like to thank the board. A year and a half ago, when you put this together, you said, come back a year later and let us know what's working and not working. And that's exactly what you did. Mrs. Godding, Mrs. Williams, others were in contact with Mr. Evans. You asked us to come back so we could give you food for thought on some suggestions of what we think is really going well, and also some possible considerations for the future. Today's an information item. If there are some changes you would like made in the future, we've got some recommendations to that end for your consideration, just tweaks, and would give you a chance to consider that in a future meeting if you would like as an action item. But for today, I'd like to hand it off to Mr. Eubanks, our man in charge of athletics for OPS.
Thank you, Dr. Kerberg, and good evening, board. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about this bold policy that you've put in, because we can proudly say that the student athletes in the Omaha Public School are held to a higher standard than any other across the entire state of Nebraska. And that is bold. And you should be commended for reviewing the policy and to take a look of how it works. So we know that time is short, and we do have a lot of information, but our presentation this evening is going to be broken down into 4 parts. We're going to review the policy very quickly. We're going to take a look at the data. What does the data show? And then we're going to have you hear from an athletic director that's been at the middle level, been at the high school, been a collegiate athlete himself, to talk about where the rubber meets the road. How is the policy working for him and his athletes, representing all of the 7 high schools in the Omaha Public Schools, and then finally recommendations. So the policy review, basically we have a no pass, no play policy. Middle and high school students must maintain a passing grade in all classes to participate in NSAA sanctioned activities. We're moving towards a student must have earned a GPA of 2.0 or higher during the previous grading period, which would be the quarter, or maintain a cumulative GPA of 2.0 or higher to be eligible to participate. Students who are ineligible still may practice but may not be able to compete in any contests. And the academic coaching program is available to each and every student, regardless of whether they meet the criteria or not. So this last year, 2014-15, all incoming freshmen were ineligible if they were failing more than 1 class. So 2 or more, they were ineligible. This year's freshman class, freshmen are ineligible if they are failing any course at any quarter grade. They are ineligible for competition. Next year, 16-17, that freshman class, that's the full implementation of the policy. That is where student may not be able to participate if they have failed any classes and have not met the 2.0 GPA threshold. And then 1920 is actually the date when we will have all of the students under the same policy. So as the freshman class this year will keep their same level of which they entered. So as sophomores, they are ineligible if they have failed more than 1 class. So that's how that works. And so we have for you tonight, I'd like to pass the mic over to Mr. Christopher Fitch, who is our data and research expert, and he has a few slides that he'd like to share with you.
Good evening. I'm going to talk to you briefly tonight about what kind of impact the new athletic eligibility policy is having. And as Mr. Eubanks said, the policy is being implemented in stages. And so for this past year, the policy only applied to 9th graders, and those students couldn't fail any more than 1 course. And so given that it's being implemented in stages, we wouldn't expect there to be a large impact of the policy the first year, but we'll kind of briefly run through some numbers to show you what kind of impact we saw. And really there are three areas where the policy might have an impact, and the first of those is athletic participation. And so if you look at the pie charts here, we have on the left a pie chart illustrating the racial breakdown of 13-14 athletes, and then on the right, the same pie chart illustrating the racial breakdown of the 2014-15 athletes. So you have the year before the policy was implemented and the first year, this past year, where the policy was applied to ninth graders. Now you'll notice here that the total number of athletes remained relatively the same. So you had 3,276 total athletes in 2013-14 and 3,273 total athletes in 2014-15. And you can also see that the racial makeup of those athletes remained relatively stable in both of those years. Now I will say that we're illustrating all athletes. If you look at these same pie charts for ninth graders, they look almost identical. And so overall, we're really not seeing any impact on the number of students who are participating in athletics at this point. And that may change in the future, but that remains to be seen. One thing I do want to point out before we go on, though, it's very important that you understand that we can only track the athletes that actually make a team. That's all that we track right now. And so although the number of athletes on a team remain relatively stable, it's possible that the pool of athletes who are trying out for sports has changed. We just don't have a formal way to track that, and that's something that I think we're going to look at implementing here in the next year or two. So the second major area that we could expect to see an impact of the policy is on the academic performance of student athletes. After all, the policy was designed to motivate athletes to do better in school. And so you'll see here again we have two charts that are comparing the academic performance of 2013-14 ninth graders in this case to 2014-15 ninth graders. The chart on the left there is GPA by term, and the chart on the right is the percentage of credits earned by those athletes. And so what you'll see there is that those bars are roughly the same size in all cases, and in fact there are no significant differences between the performance of 13-14 athletes and the performance of 14-15 athletes. And so at this point, the policy doesn't seem to have had any impact on the academic performance of athletes, and I will say that this is true at other grade levels as well. You see the same sorts of patterns when you compare those 2 years. The third and final area that the policy might have an impact is on the eligibility for competition. That is, how many students were ineligible as a result of the policy. And so you'll see here that in 2014-15, this past school year, we had a total of 64 ninth grade athletes who lost eligibility for some portion of their athletic seasons. And we have here on the pie charts, essentially on the left there, that group of 64 athletes broken down by school. You'll see that there's some variation between schools. We had a high number of ineligible athletes at Bryan High School with 15 and a low of 4 athletes at Burke High School. And you'll see in the chart on the right, those athletes broken up by racial ethnic categories. And you'll see there that 46.9% of those ineligible were black, 31.3% were Hispanic, 14.1% were white, and 7.8% were from some other racial or ethnic category. And if we break those 64 down further, you'll see that 81.25%, or 52 of those 64, were male, and only 12, or 18.75%, were female. You also see that 55, or about 86%, were participants in the free and reduced lunch program, and 55, again, 86% were from minority, racial, or ethnic groups. Now, looking ahead, if we take those same ninth graders and we say who participated in sports in the fall of 14-15, we see that there are 22 students who will now be 10th graders who will be ineligible during the first quarter of the upcoming school year. And again, you'll see if you look at the racial makeup, you see that a large majority of that group is made up of male minority students who are participating in the free and reduced lunch program. One other thing we did is we wanted to get an idea of what kind of impact could we expect there to be on eligibility when the full policy was implemented. And so what we did, we took our 2014-15 athletes, so there were 3,273 total athletes, and we said, had we applied the full policy, so both the no pass, no play and the 2.0 GPA, how many of those students would have been ineligible during that school year? And what you'll see here is that of those 3,273 total athletes, 803 would have lost eligibility at some point during their respective athletic seasons. And so that's roughly 25% of all athletes would have lost eligibility at some point during the school year. If you break those 803 athletes up by race, you'll see that 40% of those athletes would have been black, 30% would have been Hispanic, about 20% would have been white, and about 10% would have been from some other racial or ethnic category. Breaking those 803 students down even further, you'll see that 74% of those students would have been male. About 80%, again, would have been from minority racial or ethnic groups, and about 75% would have been students who were participating in the free and reduced lunch program. And so overall, it appears as if a large percentage of those impacted by the policy are going to be, again, male minority students who participate in the free and reduced lunch program. Now, I do want to talk briefly about academic coaching, and it's important to know how this program is operating because this is the program that's offered by the district that's supposed to help athletes meet those eligibility guidelines. And so we have just kind of a brief overview of some of the data from our most recent evaluation of that program. And so you'll see in 2014-15, we had a total of 618 students who attended academic coaching. And on average, those students were in sessions for a total of 11.78 hours through the school year. And you'll notice that the median number of session hours attended was 8.0 hours, which is lower than the average. And again, that's due to this distribution you see on the graph. And I will go ahead and explain this. Essentially what you have here are two graphs on top of one another. And so if you look at the bar graph, that's a frequency distribution. And so if we go over here and you look at this bar that has a 2 underneath it, what that means is that roughly 115 of the students in the program attended only one academic coaching session for 2 hours. If you look above the 4, you'll see there that about 77 of those students attended only two academic coaching sessions for a total of 4 hours. The line that you see is basically illustrates the cumulative percentage of students who fall to the left of that line. And so just as an example, I said the median was 8.0 hours. So if you look here where the 8 is, you'll see that line cross right at the 50% mark. And that means that 50% of the students in the program attended for 8 hours or fewer. Now, given the relatively low number of hours attended in the program, it's perhaps not surprising that we don't see any measurable impact on athlete GPA or their number of course failures. And I will say that although we have a fairly limited sample size, we did kind of try to look at a subset and look at those that attended for 20 hours or more. But we also didn't see any significant impact on GPAs or the number of course failure there. I will say, however, that we did survey students, academic coaches, and athletic coaches, and most students suggested that they believed that the program was helping them perform better academically, and they also believed that it was helping them avoid course failures. However, we don't see that in the data. I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Mr. Dillon, and he's going to tell you a little bit about how the policy operates in the schools.
Thank you. I'm going to slide back just to kind of give some clarification on this chart. Some of these kids, like the 2 or the 4, could be potentially kids that aren't necessarily required to go. As we mentioned, any kid can come to the program. So a student may just come in, hey, I need some help real quick with an assignment. Their teacher may be one of the academic coaches working on a project, so they may stop in briefly, but that data is recorded in there kind of based on who was there that day. Also, one of the things with the data is no way currently to track the makeup sessions that kids will have to make, so that also isn't reflected in there, but we've been talking about different ways to try and make that more transparent in the future. All right, now more to my part of my presentation. What I kind of want to bring you guys in on is some things that the data doesn't show. So some things that you can't necessarily see by looking at numbers, and then kind of explain kind of what the process looks like, how this message is communicated. Number 1, athletic directors notify students and their parents about requirements to attend academic coaching or a loss of eligibility. We do several things. We send out those flyers that are in front of you to all the parents. At the school, we host assemblies, expectation assemblies, where we talk at each individual grade level about academic coaching along with other things. But that is another place where we discuss academic coaching. And as you know, any student could fall into academic coaching, the program at any time. So that is very important that we always talk to everybody about it, because, you know, everybody has to be informed. So if they were to end up in the program, they'll kind of know what to expect. We talk about it at parent meetings. Every athletic program, we have a parent meeting. We talk about academic coaching, either myself or one of my assistants, or somebody within an academic coaching program speaks to the parents about any questions they have, and then what that program entails. Once a kid's identified, we make sure we try and get a hold of the parent through phone. If we can't get a hold of them, we send a letter. We also meet individually with the student, kind of explain the program and the process. Athletic directors, in number 2, provide coaches with a list of students who are ineligible or are required to attend academic coaching. We email rosters. Basically, we get the rosters that are compiled from the coaches. We have to look up each individual student, every individual student in the program. So I would get a roster from the coaching staff, a football team. Let's say our varsity football team would probably have like 70 kids or something. I have to look at each individual student to make sure that they either were in the requirements or not in the requirements. And that could vary by grade level, as you know. So it's, you know, quite a bit of work and a task to be able to figure out who belongs exactly where, especially at the grading periods. So that can be difficult at times. But once we get those, we send those out to the coaching staff. Like I said, we notify the parents, and we make sure the kid knows that they're a part of the program, and kind of what that looks like going forward. Number 3, the athletic director, head coach, and parent are notified, and the athletes who fail to attend academic coaching when required to do so, we make sure we email every single time a kid misses to the coach, and when we talk to the student every single time they miss, and figure out why, and figure out ways to get those things made up. The athletic staff keeps athletes and coaches informed of their current academic status. Every time a kid comes into academic coaching at Central, the first thing we have them do is pull up their portal, check their grades, see where they're at. Hopefully the teachers are updating their grade books so they can get an accurate view of where they're at currently as far as where they stand within the classroom. We also look at progress reports. We try to red flag kids, any kids that may look like they're potentially leaning toward being ineligible, from if a kid had a D, that could become an F, or a kid with a 2.3, something like that, 2.5, whatever. We try and get a benchmark and notify the kids and coaches if they're in possible failure status. The number of students going out for sports has decreased. One of the things I said, like the data doesn't show, our freshman basketball program at Central, we went from typically having 100 plus students to try out to 35 students this past year. So the pool has shrunk significantly. And one of the things that I noticed is when I started an academic checkout policy at Central, so I end up seeing all the kids before each sport to make sure we don't miss anything, making sure the kids, are academically set, make sure that the kids have all their stuff, their information in. So one of the things I talk to the kids about when I do see some students come through the line that I may not necessarily know, especially the freshmen, you don't know who's going out for a sport. So when they show up, I talk to them about, hey, this is what your status is, this is where you're at, this is where you were sitting in the program, giving them those reminders, and a lot of them they turn away. And then, you see some other kids, they go down the line, they tap a couple of other friends they know are in the same status, they drag them out of line. I see them next day in school, ask, hey, what's happening? What's going on? You didn't come see me in the line or whatever. And then they'll kind of explain that to me. So that's how I know what it was about. So I see some of those, and maybe that's a part of it, maybe it isn't, but definitely something to think about. Athletic eligibility requirements have become more stringent. It may be difficult to fill rosters in some sports. I'll give an example for track season. We went from being potentially a state championship team to being dead last as a state track meet for boys track. And being that said, you can look at the data and go, oh, we didn't miss that many kids, but our upperclassmen as well were impacted as well because they were not at the academic coaching session. So me being all in, being firm, making sure that, hey, I reached out to you, I talked to you several times, I talked to your parent, I've been on you all year, kid comes out, you haven't been coming to academic coaching all year, we've been talking about it all year, I'm not going to let you try out. Standing firm on it. Some of the kids that maybe I weren't as assertive or I didn't get every single step crossed because I didn't know that kid was coming out, work with him a little bit, come out, we're going to do some makeup sessions, get you in the line, to get some things caught up. Never really got caught up to the extent to where there's things that they missed, but work with some kids that I weren't on top of necessarily because basically that's what the policy says. If they're not attending the program sessions, they shouldn't be able to try out. So just kind of nipped it in the bud and let kids know I was serious about it. And most kids knew I was serious about it because I was pretty firm and strong about it during basketball season. So as that rolled around, that's kind of what it looks like. And you'll see more of an impact this year because a lot of those freshmen will now be sophomores, so even football per se, you'll see the numbers will be a lot lower as we are looking at the data moving forward. And I can just look at our attendance currently, and I can see some of that reflected in our numbers in the summer. Students who decide they would like to join a team may miss out on an opportunity, and that's kind of what I was just briefly discussing. And that's a scary thing because you never really know. Some kids you may be able to reach out to, you're trying to pull a kid along. Teacher comes to you, hey, can you talk to this kid about, maybe getting out for sports? That was something that was common to me as a coach. So I would constantly talk to kids in trouble, kids in gangs, kids I know. And now when I talk to those kids, it's kind of a turnoff. It's like, man, I'll do it, but if I can't play in the game, I ain't going to come. Kids want to play in the game. The main call I get as an athletic director is kids that are on the team, they're upset about not playing in the game. It's playing time. That's the main comment I always get. So kids that don't even have the opportunity to play, it's really hard for me to get them to buy into coming out for the team to begin with. At least that's the struggles that I've seen or I ran across this past school year. Students can go from the C to an F very quickly, and this is more the guideline with it. In the summative exam, it's 65% of your grade. In the first quarter, which happened to a lot of our athletes that became ineligible, they were doing fine. They had a C. They took one summative exam, and in the first quarter, that's common. So if you don't do well on the summative exam, you can go from a C to an F very quickly. 65% of your grade, one F, that can happen twice. One class you may have already been failing, just been really bad at the subject. Another one happens that was kind of unexpected. A lot of our kids, they kind of snuck up on them. They were fine. I mean, we do grade checks all the time at Central, progress reports, looking at some of those kids, and all of a sudden that quarter report came out and it's like, what happened? So it can happen overnight. It's just something that, could be really tricky. students may miss. Students with GPAs well above a 2.0 could fail a quarter course as well. So that's kind of a fear, and I don't want to dive back from anything, but we had one student who had a 4.0 who at the quarter had an F. He's got a 4.0, one of our top students in the school. Now, the ironic part is by the end of the semester, he had a B, but at the quarter, he had an F. So if he was one of those students that, were in that full implementation plan, he would have had to sit out and miss that season. So that's something just, to be cognizant of. And it's not something to say, hey, I don't want a kid to take a challenging course, but that may be a potential drawback. In Nebraska schools, you have to take 3 math courses to graduate. So some students may be discouraged about maybe taking that 4th year math, looking at that going, I'm not great in math, maybe not. So something to think about, something to look at. You want to keep kids being challenging courses, and one of the benefits with standards-based grading is you can always reach that standard. You can meet it at any point, which is a really good indicator with our semester grades, kind of showing what you learned from that course. Like in our case with that kid with the 4.0, he grinded, he worked at it, he ended up getting his grade, but we all learned at the same pace, but he eventually got, to that end goal, getting a B in the class, but it could be dangerous sometimes. It's very difficult to track those failing grades sometimes. Like I said, you can be on it, you can be looking at it from campus, and all of a sudden, you can end up with a failing grade just like that. Term and cumulative GPA is much easier to track. So if we went from not necessarily focusing on the Fs, we can still have that same high standard, basically managing those GPAs, looking at that current GPA or quarter and semester GPAs. This is also something that's really hard to do in my job. Let's say for summer school, and the policy says that could take over whatever the quarter grade was. So I have to go through and look at each individual kid, and if they failed a course, then I have to go back to see, okay, where was their summer courses, and then where did that line up to at that certain point in the kid's GPA? Where was that F at? Was it this quarter? Was it last? So I have to do a lot of math, basically all by hand, to figure out where those summer grades go into place, because our system doesn't allow for that to take an effect. So it all has to be individually done. So the computer printouts that Chris will pull up, you cannot see any of that evidence. You have to literally manually go in and figure out each student, if they failed a course, looking and see if they took summer school and match that up. So it's really difficult to do, and it's a lot of room for error. It's difficult to recruit teachers to participate in academic coaching sessions after school. The time commitment is really strenuous sometimes. The way it was designed, which I changed at Central, was you would do the academic coaching after practice. So some schools like in Northwest, they still do it after practice. So now with the extended day, they were getting done before like 5:45, 5:30, getting up there by 5:45 after they eat. So they would get out of there at 7:45. Now you add 30 minutes on that, they're getting out of there at 8:15. So now you have to start, thinking to yourself, do I want them here that long? Me, myself, personally, I kept them all I did it right after school and just said, you know what, I got to get kids home, got to get them out of here on time in a timely fashion. So kind of bumped it up to that point of getting it there right after school. Okay. So it's difficult to keep kids engaged additionally for 2 hours after school. So after being there a long time, now with the extended day, it's really hard to keep them engaged going that long right afterwards. Also, additional structure activities I think are needed to help prepare some of our tutors with different techniques to ensure that these kids are making good use of their time and uses their academic coaching. So with that being said, just looking at some things, but availability to maybe get some staff retrained or teaching proper tutoring techniques, or maybe doing something on the lunch hours to be able to allow more flexibility to get the right teachers to be able to meet the needs of some of those students that are attending more than 20 hours when we may not necessarily have a science teacher available after school. That's it.
And I will tell you, Mr. Dillon worked diligently at the academic coach program. He's passionate about this, and he really represents, I think, all 7 of the high school athletic directors with some of their challenges that they saw to really manage this on a day in, day out basis. So, and we understand that we are very close to the time of the start of your meeting, but moving forward, I think that we would like to take a look at this. What is of grave concern to me and to all our athletic directors is that the minority male students that really seem to be at risk, that we know that, but as the policy continues to progress, we may be limiting some of their opportunities to be a part of school, and we know that athletics can make a difference. I'm a firm believer in that. Extracurricular activities can save young people's lives, and it gives them a sense of belonging, something bigger than themselves. But we would like to take a look at the policy moving forward with some slight tweaks and revisit this to make sure that we are not excluding, as the data shows, 25% as we move forward with this program. We thank you for the opportunity tonight to present the findings after year 1, and we're steadfast in our efforts to every child, every day, prepared for success.
Our meeting's actually not starting until 7:30. So we've got some time to ask you a few questions as well. And we're going to adjust the workshop based on, covering the information. I had one question, and I guess a couple. I know you talked about the reporting systems and the difficulty in managing that. Has there been any conversation in developing any kind of reporting system through IMS to be able to pull that data in more easily and ensure that there's not, computation errors by doing it manually?
And it was really tough this year because we switched district athletic directors. We were kind of vacant for a while without one. And as the program got started, we noticed a lot of different things that originally were set up in Infinite Campus that just wasn't working. So we initially made some tweaks to that. Still, then we realized, you couldn't do the makeup, tracking that makeup piece. We ended up going to some hand stuff, but weren't able to backdate that attendance when Crystal Pula attendance logs and things like that. So I guess that would be more of a question leaning toward Mr. Fitch over here that would be able to answer that better.
Or maybe just something to look at and see, what opportunity is there to develop some?
I think there's probably some opportunity there to try to make it easier on school staff to keep track of things. However, I do think there are parts of the policy that make it very complicated to implement. Mr. Dillon talked about the summer school thing, where theoretically a summer school grade can replace a failing grade from the previous school year. There's no easy way, at least I'm not smart enough to figure out a way where you could go back and check that without actually going to look at each individual student to see which courses they took in summer school and did they take a course that replaced their failing grade previously. There's just no easy way to do that. So again, perhaps there's someone smarter than me that could figure it out, but as far as I know, when I was kind of crunching the numbers, that was one of those things where I didn't even look at that. Part of that was because summer school grades weren't finalized when I started doing the data analysis this year. And part of it as well was just that to do the whole district, to go through like all 3,000 athletes and do that, there's just no way you can do that.
Okay, great. All right. And I guess this is just a question for the board, because I do remember this conversation related to semester versus quarter grades. Did we focus on quarter grades to ensure that you were only out for a quarter? And is that why we didn't? Because I know we talked about the summative piece, and I know that was one of my concerns initially, was that I've seen that happen with especially the parochial school system, where you have one bad grade and then you're tanked for a while.
Right. So one of the advantages of looking at quarter grades was that it gave students an opportunity every 8 weeks to renew their eligibility status. But the flip side of that is that quarter grades and semester grades are not really equivalent. Semester grades represent the whole body of work of the entire course, whereas quarter grades, as Mr. Dillon said, potentially you have one summative exam that makes up a very large portion of your grade at that point, and if you had an off day or you struggled on that one exam, you could lose eligibility there. And so it's kind of, I don't think we're suggesting that you necessarily go away from quarter grade, but perhaps, the semester grade somehow trumps the quarter grade at the end. It's something that those are the kind of things that we want to think about going forward. So.
Okay, because summatives are not, you can't make up a summative, is that correct?
I would say regarding
Right.
our belief is in representing the athletic directors dealing with the student athletes every day, that the failure, and especially with our freshmen that are coming up, to have zero wiggle room could be very detrimental. And I'm here to tell you, pure confession, I failed my driving test first time I ever took it. I've got a student that's going to be a junior at Central High School and perhaps started math a little over his head. He'll be in calculus this year as a junior. It's really struggled. There's been some D's that, and he's a 3.8, 4-point, student, but to have zero wiggle room for a failing grade, I think is you're painting yourself into a corner.
Ms. Williams?
So first I have to say that before this was an official program, Central was doing it, and I'm going to put my daughter on the spot. She's probably not going to be happy with this. But her freshman year, she really struggled, and she was put on academic probation. And this year I've seen incredible change positively, but we also proactively as a family sat down and figured out what she could do. And so she's taking a pass class, so she'll go get food, she'll go down. She's meeting, during the day. I mean, this year she's taking 2 honors classes, where 2 years ago I would have never thought that, just because of her challenge with being an athlete and a student. But so I really like looking at some of the different study periods, shorter amount of time instead of 2 hours after school one day. Why aren't we looking at, consecutive, it's 30, 40 minutes every day? I mean, I think that's where you get more bang, because you're understanding theories and processes and procedures on a regular basis. So I really like those program changes that are listed on your changes. And I struggle with the grades as well. I think that, if a student is really failing, then we have to do our duty to get that student back on track. But once they've met that, it's almost like a punishment that they have to wait until the next quarter. So what if they brought that grade up? It's almost the opposite of maybe they're getting the A at the beginning and they tank that exam and now they're failing. It could be the opposite. And so really looking at how to tweak that some. So I overall, I'm very much in support of this, but I do think there should be some changes to this. And so I do like something we can do within the day. I think, and the other thought I had was where she took a study hall last year, she took a credit accrual over the summer. She didn't want to lose that month of summer. After the first week, she was all in, passed the class, got the extra class out of the way. So really opening our options, I think that could be another way if the student has to take that. Nobody wants to go to summer school, but if that keeps you eligible, gets you graduated on time, I mean, I think those are some of the open-minded options that we should be looking at for our students.
Mr. Wing?
The quarter grade came from discussions with staff who felt like they couldn't, the first proposal, if you check, I guess you have to go back to the archives because it's not on, but it was every 2 weeks there would be a grade check. And staff came back and said it's too hard for us to do every 2 weeks. Then we said semester, and then they said, well, a kid could fall so far that they won't have intervention by then, so it was the settlement on the quarter grade, because we argued over whether it should be 2 months or a quarter, and we ended up on the quarter. Second, there is a waiver option. How many kids have implemented the waiver option out of that 65 kids?
most of the kids, the waiver option is just for 1 year. So unless you're a senior, you're probably going to wager bets. I mean, I had several kids that became eligible, and they were just kind of like, I'm just going to, see what happens, but I'm not going to do it this year because, I'm a sophomore. I'm not going to do it right now. I'm a freshman. I'm going to, save that for when I'm a junior if something happens, as opposed to using it currently as a freshman.
Well, and the reason I bring this up is that, and that's part of the reason why this board voted for the implementation over years, and the full policy doesn't take effect for 2 more years. It's 2 more years before the full policy takes effect. But this policy wasn't just based off of what other districts are doing. It was based off of our middle school program. Our middle school program supposedly had a no-fail, no-pass, no-play program for years. So to me, there's a disconnect when I see going forward, we're not looking at middle school, we're looking at current high school. But if they've had this for years and kids now get to high school and start failing, there's a disconnect. So to me, it isn't the standard, it's been the implementation and the drop-off. And I think I agree with Ms. Williams that we need shorter time versus 2 hours, et cetera. I know North High has a class you can take, a substitute of PE for athletes. And they start off every morning with their coaches. And many of those kids who are failing or getting behind in class will take a day or two and go to tutoring. I mean, that probably needs to be implemented all the way across the school district. But, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to we set a standard that'll be fully implemented in 2016, 2017. And I guess the question I have for staff is, are you saying we can't reach that standard?
I would say the middle school piece, I was a middle school AD, that is a policy, but it was like every 2 weeks. Like I can pull a kid across and say, hey, hey, I'm going to see you around a grade check. And then that kid will come through, and they'll get their grades up or whatever. So we can kind of continue to work with them and keep them to be able to see that light, hey, I can just work hard and get this up. And then they were back out there as opposed to, you got to sit out. And I mean, you're talking high school, man, it's a quarter's the whole season.
But what I'm saying is that was staff's recommendation to us not to do every 2 weeks because of the number of high school athletes.
I think if you
I'm okay with going every 2 weeks, and if a kid gets their grades back up and gets back into a passing status, they can get back out there and finish the football season. Because we're talking about football and volleyball, and then track are the only, and softball are the only semester. Basketball covers 2 semesters. Mm-hmm. So we're really just talking about sitting out fall and spring. So I don't have a problem going every 2 weeks, and if they get back up to a passing grade, they can get back out there on the field or the volley or the court or whatever. But that's what staff pushed back on us about. So, I mean, staff's got to decide how they want to do it, but that's how it was negotiated. I just wanted to, we had that 4 or 5 conversations, and that's what it, but I guess my last point is the whole point of this policy is high school is too late. This has to start at the middle school level, and that's why we based it off the middle school policy. Because if you could do it in middle school, why can't you translate that into high school? So I'm not in favor of lowering the standard at all, not even in favor of moving out the pass, no fail. We got to implement better, and this just exposes that we're not doing what we can to reach certain groups. But unless staff is going to tell me we can't meet that standard at all, that's a bigger issue. But if it's good for our middle school, it's good for our high school.
I guess in response to that, I can agree wholeheartedly with that it needs to start earlier, but they're 2 different policies. As Mr. Dillon was trying to explain, is that at the middle level, you do a grade check. Typically, at some middle schools do them once a week. A few kids come up on that list. Hey, Johnny, your grades are low. We're going to hold you out. You talk to the coach. Let's say that grade's brought back up in 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. That student doesn't sit out 2 weeks. It's once that grade is in passing status, they're eligible to play right away. This policy really has the student has to sit for an extended period of time with no opportunity to participate other than to practice. I think that's the key fundamental difference. And I think it was brought up in order to get the data. I think that the middle level program, our middle schools are smaller. They don't have the same capacity, the number of athletes, the number of sports that are offered at the high school. So I think it is more of a daunting task for our ADs to try to track each and every athlete every 2 weeks. But I understand philosophically what you're saying. If the grade is up and the student has demonstrated that they're in passing status, I think that they should be able to play.
I would like to respond to that. While I understand things are bigger, let's take a typical football program. 125 kids tops. There's 15 to 20 coaches. You break that up by 10 and 10, and you monitor 10. Out of that, let's just say 200 kids, a huge football program. Out of that 200 kids, you're talking 20 to 25% who we need to concentrate in on and help. If I have 20 coaches and I assign each of them 10 kids, they signed up to be a coach. They are getting extra pay to be a coach. Part of that is to monitor and help these kids get the resources they are. Basketball, 60 kids in a program, which most kids don't. Four levels and 2 freshman teams sometimes. You got 8 or 9 coaches. I see them all at the games. You break them up 10 by 10 and you say, you got these 10. Because 50% of those kids, all you have to do is say, hey, how are things going? Great. And they keep moving. It's the other 40, and really you get down to about 20, 25% that we need to put our hands on and make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing and help them. And I'm just not buying that we can't track this. The problem is the implementation has been on the ADs, and that's not where the implementation should have been. It should have been on these coaches who are seeing these kids day in and day out. They are responsible for this, and they should be the one taking this burden. If they want to be a coach in Omaha Public Schools, they need to make sure their kids are meeting some standards.
Ms. Williams.
So I just wanted to jump in on the time frame conversation. I get the 3 or 4 days. I think it should just be a set time. It doesn't have to be as long. I mean, like if it's 2 weeks, if it's 1 week. But I did want to offer that for my experience as a parent, the coach and I are like this, both coaches actually. But we have that conversation because I feel like you're my partner in this as far as athletics and academics, and so we're all going to have this conversation together. And I know that Lodge watches, Coach Lodge watches his team's grades, and he's going to let them know in advance. And it's just we're changing the culture to start this earlier. And so that's the thing we need in middle school as well, is to get coaches to, you're a partner in the student success, and really having them build that will build the relationship, will create more success for the student academically and athletically, for the school. It builds that pride. And so if we can have them looking at that more frequently, if it's every week, if it's every 2 weeks, and if they fall below, then maybe they bring that back out. But you know what? You're out for a week. Let's just say a week. And your students are going to get it earlier that, we have to work hard. We have to put that extra piece in. So, I mean, I would like to see when you all come back, as this is a workshop, you will eventually be coming back with some recommendations. And so really looking at some of those things, and again, just being open-minded, and how in the student's day can we make this more feasible, not wanting to tax, teachers staying after to do 2 hours at 5 o'clock. That is a bit much. But I think we're onto something here, but we also need to keep our standard and keep our students accountable, because we want them to succeed, and if we're not going to keep them accountable, they're not going to succeed like they should.
Mr. Vargas.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. The first is just, one, it's extremely helpful to see the moving forward around the academic coaching program changes, because I think that gets to this, we're implementing a program, we need to make sure that we are evaluating it and thinking about the changes of implementation to make it work as opposed to the, again, and I agree with what other board members are saying, I do not want to lower the standard by any means, especially given that this is so new and we're thinking about, change. I think when we're innovating, implementation and follow-through is a 90% of actually making something stick. It's culture change, making people take different practices, making people do things differently in the way that they're tracking their data, reevaluate their role, reevaluate the role of ADs, reevaluate the role of coaches. So I want to make sure that that's something we continue to hold that bar. But in regards to the process, the 1, 2, 3, 4 process for practice in schools, it was great to see recommendations for program changes for academic coaching, but I didn't see any changes. Do you have any recommendations on changes in this process? For example, athletic directors provide coaches with a list of students who are ineligible. The third one. Athletic director, head coach, and parent are notified of athletes. It seems like parents are only notified via email. If the is it? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. What did you say?
I called them.
Okay. What's the data around because I'm thinking if the population is 80% free reduced lunch and 80% African American, Latino, or minority groups, and the parents of those students, I mean, how often are we tracking these calls? I mean, are we using other means that we think are going to be much more effective? Are we working with the communications team to try to do things? Are we working with the community organizations to try to double down on these efforts? Because that's the piece that's a specific population, right, that we've struggled in other areas to reach them. What are we doing differently, or what are recommendations that we should be doing differently to reach that population of parents and community?
I can speak on that. I call, or the academic coach calls often. Like I said, if a kid misses, or we even call them just to update them, let them know how they're doing, or if a kid's not engaged while they're there, it's conversation with me, it's conversation with the other academic coach. We're making those calls. It's really just the two of us. So we're making those calls. One of the things I talked to Steve and some others about in the meeting was, like when I was in McMillan, we had like different community organizations. Sometimes hearing that message from somebody else is different, and that's what catches that kid's attention. If it's because that kid's got a relationship, just because that kid looks like that person working with them. We talked about this stuff. Some of that stuff costs money, or time to be able to get that group in. But we talked about different things as far as how that would look, but we didn't put all that up on here because we didn't know exactly what you guys wanted. I actually got a folder over there with like 90% of that stuff even outlined.
That's great.
There.
That's fantastic. I appreciate you calling that out. But it does get to this. What would be really helpful is more recommendations on how to improve the process to make sure it's more effective in addition to the academic coaching. I just want to make sure that the communication structures we're providing, it seems like there's a data issue, right? The way that we manage and track data. I mean, there's other sectors where we can track phone calls and track how often we're calling the family.
And I have those tracked too.
Okay, and so that information would be really helpful because then recommendations for how to improve that process. Again, I agree with Mr. Wayne in terms of the recommendation around maybe it's redefining the role of a coach, right? In the same way what I think we've been doing in the district, we've been redefining the role of a school leader and an executive director to be about instructional leadership. It's not about managing a school. Maybe it is redefining the role of a coach even more so to build the capacity for them to do this, redistribute that time commitment so that we are doubling down on, the portfolio of students that each coach has, and then tracking it, and then there's a system that we can track it more collectively where one person's in charge of it, and then that data rolls up somehow. I'm just thinking off the cuff, but it seems like there should be a data management system that is not just housed in one place and that speaks more directly to all those involved, that we can quarterly reflect on, that tells us how we should make changes. And if we do have that, that's great because I'm just learning about it. That's fantastic. But if we don't, that seems like a problem here because that's going to impact the effectiveness of everything that happens. I would hate for us to go to the policy and change something before we look back at how we communicate, how we are ensuring that our parents are informed, how we're ensuring we're engaging community organizations, which is one of our priorities, on how we're developing this, how we are tracking the attendance for the students that are coming, and making sure we're not tracking people that are not actually students in that danger zone. So that graph is much more telling to us. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we talked about, but the transition was just without a jump.
Right. And I think from talking to counselors and coaches, I think there is, whether in Infinite Campus or in other places where some of that data is housed but kept confidential, specific to the student. So I know there is.
A lot of that's access to, like, teacher access, what they have availability to be able to track and read that data. Some of that's, and that's why a lot of it falls on me, really myself. And I fought hard just to get it to my academic coach to be able to help me out, because, I'm at school from 7 to 10. I don't know who else puts in more hours than me. And I say that truthfully. So just being able to keep up, and, you watch all this pain, and kids, not seeing that light is really tough. It feels like it all does lie on my shoulders, but, if it's redefining the roles, it's redefining the roles. We'll roll up our sleeves and go with it. But just as far as myself, it's almost impossible sometimes.
And I can attest to the fact that Mr. Dillon is there a lot and at a lot of games at night. So, Ms. Underwood, I know you had your hand up a while back.
So I just wanted, thinking about this big picture and how this is a piece of our strategic plan, I kind of just wanted to throw out the reminder that it feels like over time we shouldn't have to be leaning so heavily on the academic coaching piece, because everything else that we're doing through the strategic plan, having an effective teacher in every classroom, having effective principals, is only going to support the academic achievement of our student athletes. So I just want to make sure we kind of keep in mind, over time, we shouldn't completely be leaning on the academic coaching piece. We shouldn't. It shouldn't be the thing that's keeping, solely keeping our athletes on the playing field. That said, it's really important. I'm not saying we should, phase it out or anything. I just kind of wanted to make sure we're keeping that in mind. And then one thing that was kind of a red flag for me is, and maybe we made this decision and I'm not remembering what the reason was, but students who decide they would like to join a team miss out on that opportunity if they didn't meet academic coaching session requirements, even if they are eligible by the time they decide to join. I'm not sure that that's completely fair. Maybe there was another reason I'm not remembering.
What I did in that situation was, I guess I used common sense, but like I had a kid that came, a soccer kid actually, but was ineligible, or he was ineligible. We kind of put the policy out. He didn't come to academic coaching session. I actually just made him make it up, even though he was in passing status. I let him come out. I made him sit. I think I made him sit 2 games, and then I just worked with him and said, "Man, I'm gonna make you go anyway," just to put my foot down. But he did it, obviously. But that's what I did, and I don't know what others would have done, but that's what I did.
It seems like maybe there's some room for flexibility in that particular piece of the policy.
Mr. Snow and then Ms. Williams.
Thank you. To me, it seems like a lot's been put on your shoulders, and that it's very unfair. I want to know, do all the athletic directors, do you guys all sit down and communicate on what each and every one of you are doing effectively and how you're really engaging these student athletes?
Yeah, we got a really tight relationship. We share off a lot of ideas. One of the reasons why I came up with the 5 o'clock thing was just talking to our team and talking to, like, Brian, for example. He said, "Hey, man, I just go, right away from 3 to 5 or whatever." And, probably a little less competitive that way or whatever the case may be, but he's got to get kids home. So I just adapted that model, and just being a college athlete, it's hard. It's so tough going to practice and then going back and learning again right away. I mean, just with no downtime, it's just hard to turn it on for another 2 hours. So that was something that I changed. 2 hours after going to practice, you just kind of want to relax a little bit, then do that if you're going to do it. But I don't know. I changed it based on that reason alone.
I mean, the reason why I asked is I remember when I was in high school, we had it right after school. I mean, the way we changed is the classes would kind of get out a little early so the athletes can start their study sessions so they can get on the field within an hour and a half. I like some of your recommendations on moving forward. I don't feel that we should lower the standard to allow them to participate. I think you mentioned it before and you guys mentioned it, maybe we should figure out some other alternatives on how to really engage our students. And I completely agree with Ms. Underwood that I think we're doing some things with the strategic plan and the Leaders Leading Leaders Conference and doing these things to empower teachers and principals that I think over time this will eventually go on down. I don't want to be that person that as soon as we see a red flag, we throw our hands up and say it's too hard. But I will stress that the required participation only during the season, I'm not in favor of that as well, because we do have some kids that, I remember in my school before, they would just take the easy classes when they were playing sports, just so they can play. And I think we want to make sure that we set high expectations for all our kids, no matter where they come from. Another question I kind of had on there was engaging our kids. Is there a way that we could figure out, for the high school piece, engage these kids well in middle school, so while they're in middle school, they know when I get to ninth grade, I have to be on this level?
I actually was the one that helped develop the middle school program. Basically, I just made it as stringent as possible, and I made it so it just went in implementation right away with no phase-in, just boom, this is what it is, just to try to get them ready for high school, just knowing if they're going to have any shot at being successful at it, it just had to go full-blown at middle school. So that's one of the things that we did. There are struggles at the middle school level as well. A lot of people recommended like progress reports. Teachers are required to do those anyway. But that's 4 weeks, a lot better than 8. It gives the kids that light that I'm talking about.
And I completely understand. I'm completely for doing it every 2 weeks, even to a point every week, because usually a lot of kids, they have games every week. So either you play this week or you don't play this week on the field. I think, sorry. I just think that we're not communicating this effectively to our coaches. I think I've talked to some coaches before. I think they feel that it's not their responsibility completely. Either the kid plays or not. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So I think as the athletic director, that is under your authority to say it is your responsibility. And I don't think you guys have to come in front of the board and talk about that, but that's under you guys to say, you are a coach, this isn't your job duty, you will get this kid to play, or I will hold this against you. I completely agree with that, so thank you.
Ms. Williams, and then
I just had a quick, I know we need to wrap it up, but I just had a quick comment that I'm going to ask in addition to my previous ask, but we've really focused on the athletes. We really haven't talked about some of the other debate, journalism, music, play production, speech. So when you come back, if we can, Chris, pull that data as well, because we really have focused on athletes. And if you have it, just send it to us. But I would like to see the full scope and not just athletes.
So one of the issues we have with the non-sport NSAA activities is that, so those students, it's not a course in Infinite Campus. They may be in band, for instance, but they're only in an NSAA sanctioned activity if they're going to state solo contest or something like that. And so those lists are kept informally by athletic directors. And so if we were going to do that, we'd have to do something to ensure that at least all athletic directors are keeping reliable lists of those students, or figure out some way to track that in campus as well.
And so I'm just going to say, I don't want Mr. Dillon to do any more work because I see him out late at games and stuff too. You need to spend some time with your family, just for the record. But if it's on here, we need to do our due diligence in tracking it. And so, it's you all as a group figure out who can take that piece over, because this is what we've told our students, our parents, our community what we're going to do. And so we should be following through with that data as well, so we can look and see what the full spectrum is. So just some food for thought.
And I think currently an athletic director, my understanding, Luke, is that you guys get a list of students who are going to those activities.
We have, if a kid goes to like the debate or whatever, basically at Central, like Deanna Kersey has a list, and then we run it through myself or Jody, mostly Jody on that. And she just kind of looks and just tries to search the kid out. She doesn't do the individual checks on those kids like I would, but she just kind of looks to see if they're in that OPS list and just kind of roll with that. It's just sometimes.
So, and I get that, but if we're going to be consistent, we need to be consistent, and so that's just we figure out that plan, and I don't, between now and the next time you all meet, maybe you find that person that can help assist that. But I would like to see that, and I think the families in the community would like to see that as well.
Miss Merica, and then I'll wrap it up.
I'll be brief, I promise. This is one of the few things where Mr. Wayne and I are completely in agreement. So I wish he was here to hear me say that. I thought it was really interesting as I was going over things for our workshop this weekend. I, through my lovely Time Hop app, was reminded of Big Ten Media Days last year and Amir Abdullah's speech, where he talked so much about being a student athlete, and that student comes first in that. And so that was just going over in my mind when we were looking at this. I completely agree with the idea that maybe our coaches could play a larger role, because I remember during my high school days, the coaches were doing that. Our athletes were carrying around things every 2 weeks to get our grades from our teacher that we turned into our coach. And if you were failing, your coach had the power to say, you're not playing this week because you're failing. You need to concentrate on school. And maybe that could be a way to work in those activities with debate, journalism, and music, is asking them to keep track and do those same kind of grade checks. I do have one request and one FYI. I'm not sure if you have this already, Chris, but do we have an overall gender breakdown of all student athletes? Or can you get that to us?
I don't have it with me right now, but I could have it in 5 minutes after the meeting.
Okay, just because we had the breakdown of the ineligible student athletes, but not overall, so there wasn't really anything to compare it to know if it's trending along the same lines as what our participation is, or if it's widely different.
I can put that together for you, and I'll send it to Mr. Ray, and he can send it to all of you.
That'd be fabulous. And then I think I said this last year when we looked at the brochure, when we print new ones, if we could get all OPS kids in it, that would be awesome.
Okay, so just a couple of thoughts. I'm just thinking back to the speaker this morning at the administrator kickoff, and then I was at the mentoring of the Midlands luncheon as well, and the speaker there spoke almost to the same topic of just really those relationships and ensuring that we keep kids focused and on track. So what I think we've heard here clearly this evening is that we believe that we're doing a lot of things that are going to get people to be on track, and our students, but we know that there will always be a few students who just need that extra push. So if you could come back to us with some kind of, after doing some research, recommendation is to, if changing from the quarter to every 2 weeks. I know when my oldest was a freshman, he carried around the sheet every week to all of his teachers, turned it into the coach, and that was how he got to play. So maybe figuring out a different way to take some of this responsibility off of our ADs. And so some recommendations that you would bring back to us on how we could maybe make it simpler, whether it would require an IMS reporting system that would allow for that to be done to avoid some of the manual work that's being done. The other thing we heard clearly was thinking about how we could do the academic coaching maybe during lunch period, which would be a great opportunity if it was 3 times a week or 4 times a week, to get kids in a room and be doing some things there. And then just your recommendation on how you could move to, if you would recommend, you bring it back to us, moving from a quarterly to every 2 weeks. So you kind of have that, so that carrot is hanging out there, and it keeps them moving. 2 weeks out of a sport is not as bad as a whole quarter. So with that in mind, I think you've brought us a lot of information. We certainly have a greater appreciation for the work that's being done and the challenge of the implementation, but I think that overall, we've all pretty much said we want to continue that rigorous piece. We just want to make it easier on those who are doing the monitoring for everybody. So thank you so much for the time you're putting in, and we certainly appreciate it and appreciate the information you've given to us tonight.
Thank you for your time.
So with that, we're going to go ahead and the other 2 items, move them to another workshop. I think this has been very productive because we've certainly covered a lot of good information, and it is one of the things that we as a board need to continue to do is check the implementation of policies that we have and gain some understanding of what's happening. So with that, the workshop is adjourned at 7:06 p.m.